Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the cowboys' tales we ride, the stories of the West campfire, truth's trail dust, memories saloon whispers, gritty humans sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The bell at St. Martin's rang once and went quiet, as if it knew to keep its voice low. Morning light fell through stained glass and broke across the pews in ribbons of red and amber. The aisle smelled like candle wax and wet wool. Boots tapped, babies fussed and settled again. Garnet Ridge did its best to hold still. Ava Jennings stood at the end of a row with Noah on her hip. His breath came warm against the side of her neck. He found the edge of her scarf and kept it between his fingers, the small rasp of fabric against his nails, a steady private sound. Her blue cotton dress had been washed thin. A stitch at the hem had pulled, then been pulled again, and she pretended not to notice. Pastor Eli Reed moved down the aisle with his book, pausing at each family. He had a pastor's careful hands, careful eyes. When he reached Ava, he leaned in so close she could smell the damp wool of his coat. "I am sorry, Ava," he said, voice low. "Our tradition asks for a father or a godfather. It is how we do it here." "It is just water," she said, almost a breath. "It is not only water." His gaze softened. "If you can bring someone to stand with you, I will be glad." She nodded, emotion so small it could have been a tremor. Noah made a round little sound and tucked his face under her chin. The wooden door at the back of the chapel took a gust of wind and answered with a long squeal from the hinge. Heads turned, then returned to the hymn. Ava felt the looking, not all of it mean, not all of it kind. She stared at the front at the silver bowl and the tiny ripple waiting there, a circle of light shaking in it. The room seemed to grow farther away, voices muffled underwater. She turned. In the shadow under the balcony, a man leaned one shoulder against the paneled wall. He wore a work coat with sap smears across the sleeve. Dust held to his boots. Grady Wolfe. People let his name do a lot of work for them. He had the look of someone who did not come to town unless there was a reason, and maybe this morning he had not found one. His eyes were on the aisle, not on her, not on anyone. As if the space in front of him were a forest road, and he was measuring it for ruts. Ava did not remember deciding to walk. Her feet were moving. Noah shifted, a quiet protest swallowed with his thumb. She reached him and had to tilt her chin to meet his eyes. Up close there was the smell of cut wood and cold air. A thin sliver of wood had worked into the pad of his thumb. Blood made a red bead there, stubborn and bright. "Can you do something for me?" she said, and heard her voice and did not recognize it. "Can you be my son's father for 10 minutes? He did not answer right away. Noah looked at him and went still. Grady's eyes dropped to the baby, traveled from the soft hair to the damp lashes, to the fingers clamped on the scarf. He gave the smallest nod. "All right." They walked side by side down the center, the rustle of clothing, the slide of boot on wood. At the rail, Pastor Reed's brows lifted, then settled. He did not ask questions he did not need. He turned a page. "Grady Wolfe," he said, "do you take this child as yours in the sight of God in this gathering?" Grady's voice had a sandpaper edge that did not make it rough so much as real. "I do." The bowl tipped. 3 drops cool as creek water found Noah's skin. He startled once, then sighed as if the chill had reminded him of something. Candle smoke curled a little toward them and made a thin gray ribbon that joined the colored light. Ava's fingers tightened around the carved edge of the rail, the varnish worn smooth by years of hands. She let herself breathe. She did not look at anyone. The hymn rose and fell. Pastor Reed closed his book and gave Ava a small nod that meant more than his words had. People stood kneelers, thumped up pews, moaned at the weight of it all. She pressed her mouth to Noah's hair and tasted dust and sweetness. She meant to slip out the side. It would take 2 turns and a quiet door, and then the steps down to the dirt road. She shifted Noah higher and started that way. A shadow moved in front of her. Grady stood there already, as if he had seen her route and walked it first. "Your wagon is too small for both of you," he said. The words came simple, not a question and not a claim. "I can manage." "I know," he said. "Let me take you." Noah reached for him without thinking. The movement surprised them all. Ava felt the catch in her chest, the half-step back, the heat under her collar. Grady put out his hands but did not take the child until she tipped Noah toward him. When he did, there was nothing uncertain in it. One hand took the weight under the ribs. The other found the back of the small head. Noah's cheek settled against the coat and went quiet there, listening to the slow drum of a stranger's heart. They went down the middle with people making space in small ways, shoulders leaning, feet tucking in. No one spoke to them. At the door, the hinge protested again. Grady looked at it just a glance, the way a carpenter looks at a crooked frame and knows what it would take. The wind pushed at them. He turned his shoulder to it so the baby did not have to feel the full of it. Outside, Garnet Ridge had taken on that wet brightness the mountain mornings get every pine needle lit with its own bead of water. The gravel was dark and slick. Across the muddy lane, an old truck waited with mud on its tires and a nick in the front fender that had not been painted over. The bed held a coil of rope and a folded tarp, and a hammer with a worn handle lay beside them like a sleeping thing. Grady set Noah careful in the crook of one arm and opened the passenger door with the other. The door hinges creaked in a small, complaining voice, not unlike the one in the chapel. He wiped a palm against his coat before he offered it to Ava. She felt the roughness of it, the callus under the thumb where the sliver had gone in. "You do not have to," she said. "I know," he said again. The words fit him used to honest weight. From inside the chapel, a final chord trembled and died. The bell did not ring this time. A breeze slid past and lifted the ends of Ava's scarf. The scent of his coat brought the mill yard to her mind, sawdust and sap, and something clean under both. Noah slept mouth open just a little. Ava put her foot on the truck's step, and the metal was cold through the sole of her shoe. She took his hand. He helped her up and then steadied her, even after she had found her seat. The passenger door hung open, catching light along its chipped edge. He looked at her, not long, not hard, just long enough. "Seatbelt," he said. She clicked it. He set Noah in the cradle of his coat and adjusted the fabric over the small knees. The truck cab held the faint smell of coffee from some other morning and the ghost of smoke that had lived there a long time ago and finally quit. Grady leaned in one knee on the running board and eased the door until it hovered at almost shut. "Hold him a second," he said. She slid her arm under Noah and took him back, feeling how the weight of him lined up with the spaces in her. Grady's hand left the edge of the door. He walked around the hood, and his boots made a wet tick against the gravel. Steady, not slow, not fast. He climbed in and turned the key. The engine coughed, thought about it, then decided to behave. The wipers lifted a sheet of water off the windshield and laid it to the side like a curtain. He looked once at the chapel in the mirror. The glass gave back the colored light in small pieces. He looked at the road. His hand found the gear shift. His mouth made a line that was not a frown and not a smile. "Get in," he had said at the door, and the words still hung in the soft air of the cab, simple and solid as wood. A drop of water fell from the brim of his cap and broke on his knee. He set his palm on the steering wheel. The truck waited. Grady eased the truck onto the road. Tires found the ruts and learned them. Trees let go of last night's rain in soft taps across the cab. Ava kept Noah against her, a small rise and fall tucked under her chin. The heater coughed warm air that smelled faintly of coolant and old coffee. The town slid by in pieces through the wipers. The diner's sign blinked red once, then held steady. A stack of cut logs outside the mill steamed in the pale sun. Grady drove the way a man cuts a long grain. He did not hurry. He did not dawdle. When the gravel gave way to a narrower strip and pines leaned closer, he reached to turn the wipers down. The world outside slowed enough to see the winter-broken fence post that leaned like a tired shoulder, enough to notice the crow fussing at something bright in the ditch. Ava watched his hands. The knuckles were square, the pads were scuffed. A thin cut ran along the base of his thumb where the sliver had gone in. The wheel looked small there. Noah stirred and made a sound that was more thought than word. Grady glanced over once quick. His mouth clicked and the truck hummed a little, as if the engine had taken that as a sign. They came to the cabin with the creek behind it, a low building set into the fold of the hill. The porch ran the length of the front boards, gray with weather and soft at the edge. A wind chime made of old spoons nudged itself into a tune and then gave up. A bucket had been left under the eaves to catch a leak, and there was already a ring in the bottom from other storms. Grady cut the engine. The sudden quiet felt like something had landed and held both their shoulders for a breath. He came around and opened Ava's door. The hinge made a smaller, more embarrassed sound than the chapel's had. He held out an arm and did not touch her until she had given him Noah. The boy drooped across his chest, face open, hand slack. The smell of sleep lifted off him. The porch steps took the weight with a groan. On the top step, a rag waited in a coil beside a jar of nails. Ava reached for the doorknob and met the cold of it. She turned and pushed. The hinge answered with a long metal scrape that moved from nail to bone. Grady's eyes flicked to the door. He did not say anything. He adjusted Noah a little higher and looked into the room. Light came in through thin curtains. A kettle sat on the back burner, and wore a fine coat of dust that would burn off and smell sharp the first time heat touched it again. The table was small and steady. 2 chairs did not match. On the floor, a woven rug had faded into the soft colors of old thread. A wooden cradle waited near the hearth, pale wood, the curve of it carved with a simple spiral. Someone had started a horse on the mantel and stopped. The half of it sat on its side, a leg cracked and mended badly once before it was left alone. Ava stepped in and felt the roof accept her. She set a hand to the back of one chair, as if to slow the room, as if everything were about to slide, and she could catch it. Grady stood just inside the threshold and made himself smaller without moving. It was a way some men had. They did not take up space until you asked them to. "You can come in," she said. He came in. His boots spoke to the floor. He went to the cradle and looked down at it. He lowered Noah into the curved space, like a ferryman setting a boat in a quiet place along a bank. The boy sighed and laid one hand flat against the sheet and slept again. Ava set the kettle on the flame and turned the knob. Blue found its shape under the metal with a tiny gull's cry. Steam would take a little while. She leaned into the counter and listened to the house. It made its usual sounds. A beam clicked. A window rattled once and then stilled. The creak behind the cabin kept up its talk. Grady crouched by the mantel. He lifted the broken toy. The leg that had split showed a seam white as bone where someone had pressed glue and hope and gotten through a few minutes before the pressure gave way again. He turned it in his hands. The weight told him how much work it wanted. "He started it when I told him I was pregnant," Ava said. "He got sick before he could smooth it." She did not add anything to that. Grady nodded. He did not put the piece down. His thumb ran along the edge of the crack and came away with a dust whisper. He looked at the cradle and then at Noah, then at the little notch in the rail where a ring had knocked too hard one afternoon and taken a bite. His face did not change. He had the look of a man measuring. The kettle began to make a low sound that did not yet deserve to be called a whistle. Ava set 2 cups on the table and went to the cradle. Noah's hair had collected in damp whirls across his head. She tucked the blanket near his ribs but left his arms free. She had learned the line between comfort and trap. "Tea," she said. "There is chamomile. It is not much." "It is something," he said. They sat at the table. He set the broken toy down between them like an extra plate. The steam reached the ceiling and made the wood darker where it kissed. The tea smelled like clean grass. He picked up his cup the way a man does when he has held hotter things and has forgotten that other people blow first. "You were quick with him," Ava said. "Back there." He looked at the cradle. "He is small. You hold small things close so they do not think the world is bigger than they can handle." She nodded. She watched his hands wrap around the cup, and she thought of the weight of a log on a sawhorse, of how you have to place it right so the blade does not kick. It was not the same, and somehow it was. They did not fill the air with words. The house did not ask for them. Noah turned once in his sleep and made a half laugh that was more breath than sound. The creek kept to its lane. A bird hit the window by mistake and fluttered, then went on to the pine where it had meant to land. Grady finished his tea and set the cup a little away from the ring it had made. He picked up the horse again and tested the old glue with his nail. It lifted with a soft surrender. "If I take this with me," he said, "I can see to it. You do not have to." "I know." She slid the toy toward him, the scrape of wood on wood, fine as a whisper. He wrapped it in his red kerchief and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. The shape barely showed through the fabric, a small weight against his ribs. He stood and crossed to the door. He put his hand on the frame and pressed gently. The door moved. The hinge cried again, a thinner sound this time, because it had already given part of itself away. He reached into his coat and brought out a small tin. He opened it. Inside, a nub of wax waited with a dusting of grit on it. He rubbed his thumb over it until it warmed, and then he set the pad of that thumb to the hinge pins and left a little there. He pushed the door and drew it back. The sound shortened, then broke into smaller pieces. He did it again. It was not silent. It had learned to complain and would not forget in an afternoon. He nodded anyway. He wiped his hands on a rag that hung on a nail and put the tin back. "Thank you," Ava said. He dipped his head and reached for his cap. His eyes went to the cradle one more time, as if to check a measure. Noah slept with his mouth open and his hand curved. The wind chime outside found 2 notes that liked each other and kept them for a while. The kettle, forgotten on low, went on breathing. Grady paused at the threshold. His boots turned to the left where the porch step had softened. He shifted his weight so he would not break anything. He set his palm on the jamb again, not to steady himself, but because the wood wanted to know him a little, and that seemed fair. "This hinge has a mind of its own," he said. "It will need more than wax." Ava looked at the door. She could feel the scrape of it in her shoulder from all the time she had pushed. She could hear the long note it made when she was trying to be quiet, and it did not let her. She steadied her fingers to the edge and felt the cold in the metal and the line where the paint had gone thin. She looked back at Noah and then at him. "Maybe it will listen," she said. He smiled just enough to make one side of his cheek change shape. He touched the brim of his cap. He stepped out onto the porch, and the house released him, the way water releases a boat. The spoon chime caught a breeze and answered in a brighter key. He let the door settle behind him, and the hinge spoke once shorter than before. Gravel ticked under his boots. The truck door opened, complained closed. The engine turned and held. Inside, Ava stood with her hand on the door and felt the small vibration of the vehicle through the wood. She went to the cradle and set one finger on the center of Noah's chest. She felt the lift and fall that was hers and not hers at once. The tea had cooled. The spoon had left a mark in the thin sugar at the bottom of the cup. The house breathed. The creak kept on. She pulled a chair closer to the window and sat where she could see the porch. The wind moved the curtain a little enough to give her a glimpse of the step that would need a sister board before autumn. The hinge made no sound now. It was waiting. 3 mornings later, the creek ran full and clear. A single jay argued with its echo in the pines. Ava heard the truck before she saw it. The engine note rose, eased, then went soft as the vehicle settled by the fence. She wiped her hands on a towel and touched the door as if greeting a patient animal. The hinge gave a shorter scrape than it used to. Grady stepped onto the porch with a burlap bundle tucked under his arm. His coat smelled of fresh-cut wood and cold air. He took off his cap, nodded, and set the bundle on the table inside. Noah looked up from the rug, wobbled to his feet with both hands on the chair leg, and made a sound that had new consonants in it. Grady loosened the string and folded back the burlap. The little boat waited in his hands, smooth and honey-colored, the grain visible under the stain like water moving under ice. Along the side, a name had been cut with a steady knife. Noah. The letters a little uneven and honest about it. Ava reached without thinking and stopped her hand an inch away. She let the air between palm and wood do its work. Noah tottered closer, gripping, releasing, gripping again. Then he set both palms on the boat and laughed. The sound filled the low room and went up into the rafters, then came back down warm. "It will not splinter now," Grady said. "There is a coat of oil. Let it live with the air 2 days. Ava looked up. "Thank you." He set the boat on the rug and touched the keel to show Noah how to push. The boy took to it. The boat slid, caught on a thread of the rug, then moved again, a small traveling thing that belonged here. Grady's attention moved to the porch rail when a loose board clicked under his palm. He lifted his head as he listened to the house the way a mechanic listens to an engine. He brought in a toolbox from the truck and set it by the door. Nails gleamed in a clean row. He worked with care and no hurry. A level appeared. A plane hissed in a quiet song that pulled ribbons of wood from a stubborn edge. Motes hung in the sun like a slow snowfall. Noah crawled until he could put both hands on Grady's knee and watch the pieces curl. "Mind your fingers," Ava said, though Noah's fingers already knew where the safe edge was. Grady handed the boy a thin strip of the shaving, and Noah tried to taste it, made a face, then tried again. Ava laughed before she knew she would. It came out quick and startled her, then turned into something she had been saving without meaning to. At the sink, the pump coughed twice and then wheezed a thin thread of water. Grady listened to that too. He walked outside, came back with a leather washer and a length of hemp cord. The noise gentled, and then the pump took the prime. The first clear stream ran into the pail with a clatter that sounded like coins. Steam rose from the kettle when it met fresh water and brought the bright smell of metal warmed past cold. He took the curtain down and laid it on the table. The tear near the top had grown where a nail head had rubbed. Ava brought her sewing box and a spool of pale thread that did not match, but did not fight it either. He watched the way she set the needle, the way she used her thumb to find the old crease. He did not talk. He passed the scissors when she looked up. In the afternoon, she walked to the bakery with Noah in the sling. The road kept its frost in the shadows. Pine and flower breathed sugar and heat from its little windows. She pushed the door with her hip and stepped into the clean noise of morning work. Pans rang. A timer called out from the back and was answered. Flour dust turned the light soft. Near the counter beside the end of the glass, where cookies caught the eyes of children, a small chair sat under a length of board fixed to the wall. The chair had been rubbed smooth by a hand that knew when to stop. On the board, someone had burned a few letters with a steady patience. Noah's corner. Greta, who ran, the front glanced over from the register. "Found that when I opened," she said. "Must have had an early visitor." Ava touched the back of the chair and felt her throat work. She set Noah on it. He gripped the edge and made his please sound. His feet did not touch the floor. She adjusted the sling and tied a knot, then tied it again to keep the weight high and safe. When she took her break, she stood at the window and watched the street. Grady's truck passed slow with a load of milled planks tied in the bed. He did not see her. She almost raised a hand, then set it on the sill instead and pressed her palm to the paint. The glass felt cool and clean. At the mill yard, men moved in a good rhythm. A deck crane sat quiet while someone checked the line. A radio on a stack of timbers played a song that could not make up its mind about tempo. Someone cut it down, and the announcer's voice came on thin and bright, then went to a weather report. Pressure dropping east of the ridge, chance of heavy rain by the weekend wind through the pass by evening. A dog lifted his head and sneezed. Wolf, a man with a grin, called from the ripsaw. Hear you been to church twice in a week. You looking for redemption or a roof that does not leak? Grady pushed his sleeve up and checked the feed rate. Feed slow, he said. Blade sings less. It sounded like an answer if someone wanted it that way. The man laughed and shook his head. A sliver found the soft place beside Grady's nail and went in. He stopped what he was doing without turning the line behind him into an accident, set the board down and reached for a pocket knife with a blade he kept honest. He pressed the pad of his finger to make the splinter show itself, then slid the edge under it and lifted. A bead of blood stood. He wiped it on the thigh of his pants, and the stain joined other stains that had made a map of the work he had done this year. Back at the cabin, Ava folded tomorrow's loaves in her head while she watched Noah nap. She moved quiet, gathering the toys that had not found their places and setting them back where they belonged. She ran a cloth along the window, where the light always shows the day's dust. She set a pot on the stove with onion and carrot and listened to the oil speak. When Grady came by late, he brought a short length of hinge in his coat pocket and a small box of screws that did not strip when they met old wood. He tested the weight of the door with his shoulder, measuring the sag with his body. Then, with his eye, then, with a scrap of cedar, he cut into a wedge. He set the new leaf where the old should have been and found the stud through paint and guesswork. The door accepted the change with only a little complaint. He worked the swing until the wood learned what it was being asked to carry. Noah woke with a sound like a question, and then blinked as if the afternoon had given him a new face. Grady touched 2 fingers to the boy's foot, and the toes answered as toes do. Ava watched that small exchange and knew more than it showed. They shared stew. The 3 of them ate at the small table with their elbows tucked. By evening, a light set over the far hill, in a way that meant a car had stopped, where the view widened. A shape paused along the fence row, tall and familiar in the ribs and shoulders. Luke stood there a moment, then turned and went the way he had come. Ava saw him through the curtain and chose not to move. After Grady left the house, took back its old quiet, and then kept the new note as well, the door closed with a softer voice. The spoon chime tried a different tune. The creak ran the same, and yet the sound found a place to rest behind the mind instead of in it. Ava sat with Noah in her lap and turned the little boat over under the lamplight. Oil caught the light and held it. Letters warmed. At the mill, the radio crackled once more. The man with the grin turned the volume up to hear the part about the wind, then smiled at nothing and went back to the feed table. Grady stacked planks 2 at a time and set a hand to the edge to feel the truth of them. High clouds drew long animals over the ridge. A crow flew low across the yard with something bright in its beak. The day squared itself and kept going. Morning broke clean and bright, the kind that lays a thin shine over the street and makes the dust look like something kept on purpose. Ava tied on her apron and slipped Noah into the sling. He mouthed the edge and left a dark patch where his breath warmed the cotton. She locked the door. The hinge gave a short note and then kept its peace. Pine and Flower had its lamps on even though the sun was up. Warmth wrapped itself around anyone who stepped in. Greta glanced up from the register and lifted her chin in greeting. Trays came out of the ovens and hit the racks with a sound that was both metal and satisfaction. Ava set the basket of morning rolls where hands would find it. Noah sat on his little chair with one palm on the painted seat boss of his corner. Miss Hart arrived just after the first rush. She wore her school shoes and a coat the color of a cloud that is thinking about rain. Her hair had been pinned so tight it shone in parts. She put a small parcel on the counter and kept 2 fingers on it. "I thought of him when I saw this," she said. "A shawl. The mornings are cruel for little ones." Ava untied the string. The wool inside had been knit with more care than talent. It would do. She smoothed the row where the tension had gone wrong and found it had its own rightness. "Thank you," she said. Miss Hart leaned in. Her eyes went to Noah and softened, then came back to Ava and sharpened without hardening. A child deserves a proper name spoken by a proper father. She pressed her lips together, as if she had tasted something, and was not sure whether to swallow. Ava folded the shawl and laid it on the shelf under the counter. "He has a name," she said. Miss Hart's mouth made a small line. "Of course. I mean the kind that holds in the wind." The bell on the door saved them. A group of men from the mill came in for coffee, steam lifting off them even in the cool. Their voices filled the space and made it easier to breathe. Miss Hart paid and left with a tap of her package on the counter, as if handing over a baton. Greta slid in close to Ava and bumped her shoulder with her hip. They did not speak about it. Market day put a new face on the square. Bales of hay made corners where there had been none. A woman from the other side of the ridge brought jars that caught the light and sent it back as tiny suns. Children ran and tripped and ran again. Against the church fence, someone had leaned two old bikes that looked ready to ride away on their own if the day went long enough. Ava moved through the crowd with Noah in her arms and a paper bag of eggs balanced on her hip. People glanced and looked away politely or lingered an extra fraction of a second. Words moved like bees around sugar. Some stung and some just hummed. Two women by the ribbon stall looked over their shoulders the way people do when they know they should not and cannot help it. Grady came up the side street with a length of dowel tied to the bed of the truck. He stepped out and shut the door with a careful hand so the metal did not shout. He did not look around to see who was looking at him. He tipped his cap to a man he knew and nodded to a girl who had knelt to tie a stubborn lace. When he reached Ava, he put his hand to the dowel. "For the pump handle," he said, "if you want it." "Thank you," she said, and took the wood. It was smooth and did not show off about it. A woman near the pie table, a person with the kind of voice that can slip under a door, said something that included the word already. Ava did not turn. Noah reached for the dowel and patted it. Grady let him. The boy tapped a rhythm and then leaned against Ava's chest as if he had done some good work and could rest now. In the afternoon, the sky went white, which in that place meant the light was going through something thin and cold. Ava found Luke by the fence where the Martins always planted corn that struggled and then surprised everyone. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and his elbows flared the way their fathers used to when a point was being made without words. "You have a visitor," he said. Grady stood a little apart, as if he had learned this geometry long ago. He watched a child crawl under a market table to rescue a dropped peach and smiled with one corner of his mouth. When he came closer, he did not bring the smell of smoke, which is what some men bring, but the smell of clean work. Luke's jaw had tightened, the tendon that shows when a man wishes he could take something back and knows he will not show itself, and went away. "What are you doing here?" Wolf Luke said. The words were not a challenge, they were a test. "Buying eggs," Grady said, and then added, "Fixing a pump if a pump needs fixing." He looked at Ava. "If you want." Luke's eyes moved between them. He found Noah's face. He saw the calm there and did not know what to do with it. He worked his jaw once and let his breath out through his nose. "She does not need saving," Luke said. "I know," Grady said. Ava reached for Luke's sleeve and gave it a tug that was more memory than need. "He brought a handle," she said. "It fits the hand right." Luke looked at the dowel and then at the hand holding it and made a sound that could have been a laugh if it had been larger. They stood like that for a long moment. Three people who had each lost one thing and were not sure they should pick up another. Then Noah leaned forward, reached for the edge of Luke's collar, and brought the conversation to a place where no one had planned to be. Luke took the small fingers in his hand and shook them once. It was not much. It mattered anyway. Back at the cabin, shadows had lengthened into soft ropes across the yard. The air held the smell of warm dust and pine resin. Grady set the new handle and tightened the screw. The pump grumbled and then found its voice. Water ran steady into the bucket. He rinsed his hands and watched the lines of his palms darken and then clean. He left the bucket full where the next person would find it without thinking. He checked the back steps with his heel and found the board that had begun to tire. He pried it up and measured the span with his hand. He set a new length and put 2 screws in where nails had not held. The sound of the driver bit it and seated. The porch stopped its quiet complaint. Inside, Ava stirred a pot. Onion and carrot had given up their edges. The broth wore a sheen and promised nothing but warmth. She set bowls on the table and called Noah without raising her voice. He pulled himself along the chair and took 3 bold steps toward the table before the 4th step reminded him he had not learned everything. Grady reached out and caught a shoulder. Noah blinked twice and laughed, like falling had been part of the plan. They ate with spoons that had been rubbed thin in by other hands. Noah banged his and then took it seriously when the stew arrived. He smeared a carrot against his lip and considered the flavor as if he were a judge, and it had entered a contest he had not been told about. Grady blew on a piece of potato and put it back in his own bowl. Ava watched the steam rise and fade. Later, the day leaned into evening. The wind forgot itself and then remembered. Ava carried Noah to the porch and set him near the rail to practice standing. His fingers gripped the new board Grady had set that morning. The wood under his palms was warm from the sun, and then cool where the shadow touched it. He made that sound again that might soon be a word. He slapped one hand against the rail and looked pleased with the noise. The light went from gold to the pale color of the inside of a shell. Noah coughed once. He coughed again. It was nothing. Then it was not nothing. Ava put her hand to his forehead to tuck a curl out of his eyes and felt heat she had not felt an hour ago. A flush had crept into his cheeks and stayed. She lifted him and felt the way his weight had changed with the day, the heavy of sleep tugging at his shoulders before sleep had come. The pump handle still held a drop on its lip that had not fallen. The door shifted a little in its frame. Ava carried Noah inside and set him on her hip where she could keep count of his breath with her own. Grady stood with his hand on the rail he had set. He looked at his palm and then at the house. He stepped up onto the porch and opened the door with care. The hinge made its smaller sound, and then letting go as if it understood what was being asked of it. Noah's skin threw heat. It came quick. It came sure. Ava pressed a cool cloth to his neck. He arched away and found her with his hands greedy for her shirt, for the place where her heart pressed against his ear. The room felt smaller. The air had thickened. The creek outside kept its steady voice as if nothing had changed. Grady rinsed a cup and filled it with water the pump had just learned to give. He brought it to Ava. She tried the rim to Noah's mouth. He turned his face and made a weak sound that scraped its way out. He was heavy in her arms now, all weight and heat and stubborn breath. "We go," Grady said. Ava looked at the window. The sky had pulled itself down to the ridge. The first drops found the roof in a pattern that did not yet mean anything. She tucked Noah against her shoulder and stood. The chair leg caught her skirt. Grady moved it with a toe before she could trip. He reached for his coat and she let him slide it over Noah first, then over her shoulders. The wool held the day's work and a clean chill. At the door he put his palm to the jamb and eased it open. The hinge made its smaller sound, and then a hush as if listening. Rain slicked the steps. The bucket under the eave took the first full splash and answered in a steady clap. The spoon chime did not try a tune. It let the wind move it and said only what the wind asked. The truck took the yard with a short skid and then found grip. Grady opened the passenger door and steadied Ava's arm while she climbed. The seat felt cold through her dress. She set Noah across her knees and tried to breathe where he could feel it. Grady rounded the hood and climbed in. The engine caught. The wipers scraped once and then settled into their work. He switched on the heater. The fan blew a breath that was not warm yet but meant to be. The road out held water in its low places. Pine shed what it could not hold. The glass shook rain off and collected more. Tires found the center and kept to it. Grady drove with his shoulders and with the small muscles in his hands. His eyes measured the ruts in the water and the one place where the creek came near the road and liked to pretend it was the same thing. The truck answered with a hard working sound from the front left that he knew and trusted. "Talk to him," Grady said. Ava put her mouth near Noah's ear. "I am here," she said. "I will carry you. I am here." She laid the back of her fingers against his cheek. Sweat had made his hair a map against his head. She counted under her breath. In, out. She matched him and waited for his small body to agree. They crossed the shallow where the creek had spilled a hand over its bank. Water climbed the tire and then let go. The underside of the truck sang a wet note. Grady leaned a little into the wheel and let the gravel do its work. He did not speak. He kept a steady sound in his throat that sat somewhere between a hum and a calm. The clinic sat on a rise with a single light over the door. It made a narrow cone across the steps and into the rain. Grady pulled to the side and left the engine to idle. He came around to take Noah before she could find the latch. He tucked the boy into the crook of his arm and set the other hand to the back of the small head. Ava ran with him, feet slipping once on the top step, catching the rail. Inside, the air smelled like rubbing alcohol and washed cotton. A bell at the desk gave a delicate ring when the door closed. Nurse Myra Dahl appeared from the back, with sleeves rolled, and a pencil already behind her ear. She looked at Noah first, then she looked at Ava, then at Grady. She did not waste a word. "This way," she said. They went down a short hall into a room with a steel bed, and a chair that had learned to receive tired people. Doll set a thermometer near Noah's temple and watched the red creep. She dampened a cloth and wiped the boy's face. She turned to the sink and filled a basin and brought the water back with calm hands. She did not make the air more afraid than it already was. "Hold him upright," she said. "Let his chest be tall. Ava, you sit. I will hand you what you need." Ava sat, and Noah sat in her lap and leaned against her, like he had always known exactly how to fit there. Grady stood at her side and moved only when asked. He held the basin. He wrung the cloth and passed it back. He steadied her elbow with the back of his hand when she reached the far places of the boy's skin. He took the small bottle when Doll offered it and put it on the tray with a small click. "Tiny sips," Doll said. "Bitter. He will not thank you. Do it anyway." Ava tipped the spoon to Noah's mouth. He made a face that tried to laugh and did not find the strength. He swallowed. The next sip went easier. The third came because of the first two. She wiped his chin with the corner of her scarf. Her hands shook and then remembered how not to. The light overhead flickered once and held. The clock on the wall made a dry sound. Outside, tires hissed past on wet pavement. The clinic was its own weather inside the storm. Doll set a bundle of linen on the bed and rolled one towel thin as a rope. Under his knees, she said, "Let his body feel it is being held in more than one place." Ava lifted Noah's legs. Grady slid the rolled towel under and tucked to the edges so it would not slip. He did it the way he did everything. No talk. All attention. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out his red kerchief. He folded it clean and set it under Noah's neck so the cloth would not chafe. Doll watched without nodding. She did not need to approve what already made sense. Noah's breath found a steady that was not perfect and was good enough for this minute. Ava leaned her head to his and took in the smell of his skin, past the medicine and the soap. She could feel Grady's presence the way a person feels a wall that will not move behind them. It changed how she sat. It changed where she kept the worry in her body. Doll checked her watch and wrote a number. She loosened the window a crack and let the wet air lay cool across the floor. She set a cup of water near Ava's hand and a second near Grady's. She spoke quietly and only to the point. "You can stay as long as you need. I will be in the next room." Ava nodded. Her throat ached. She swallowed and it went away and then came back. Grady took his cup and did not drink. He set it on the sill. He pulled a chair with the blunt toe of his boot and sat where he could see the line of Noah's ribs rise and fall. His hand went to the armrest and stayed there. His fingers opened and closed once. He did not know he had done it. Rain brushed the window in a fine comb. The generator at the back of the building coughed twice, then settled into a hum that lived at the edge of hearing. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed softly, the kind of sound people make when they find a small relief they did not expect. The clinic settled. The room took the shapes inside it and kept them. Ava lifted her eyes and found Grady looking at Noah. He did not look like a man doing a favor. He looked like a man who had put his hand to a plank and felt the right weight in it. She lowered her gaze to the soft hair under her chin. She adjusted the blanket 1 inch. She counted again. In, out. The numbers made space where her fear had been. Grady's voice came quiet, not a word. A low sound, more breath than note. It filled the space between the chair and the bed. It did not ask for permission. It stopped when Noah's breath evened. It began again when a small hitch returned. It found the pitch that the room would carry. Doll stepped back and checked the numbers. The corner of her mouth changed shape for a heartbeat. She lifted the lamp and turned the knob until the light was less softer on the eyes, kinder on the nerves. She left the door a hand's width open. Ava set her cheek to the top of Noah's head. The room went to a quiet that was not empty. The rain wrote its thin handwriting on the glass. The hinge in Ava's door would have liked this quiet. The creak would have understood it. Grady watched the small rise and fall and kept his own breath where it matched. The night began to feel like a place that might hold. Night kept its hold on the clinic and then softened its grip. The clock clicked in small teeth. Ava shifted so Noah could lie high against her chest with his head turned to the light. The red kerchief under his neck had warmed to his skin. Grady sat where he could see the lift and fall and kept that low sound in his throat that seemed to give the room a center. Nurse Doll passed once in the hallway with a stack of folded linens and nodded through the cracked door. Noah stirred. His lashes glistened, stuck for a blink, then let go. He pressed his mouth to the cotton and fussed until he found his thumb. The hand that was not busy searched. It found the back of Ava's fingers and stayed there. He swallowed, tried the air as if it were new. His eyes went to the corner where the lamp made a soft pool and came back to her face. He made a syllable and lost it, He tried again. The sound came out small and raw and whole. Da! The room did not move. The rain made a quiet on the glass and held it. Ava's breath hitched. Her free hand came up before she knew it and covered her mouth as if the word were a bright bird that might scare at the suddenness of air. Grady stilled. His eyes had been set on the boy's chest. They lifted and met Ava's. Noah blinked content with the work he had done and let his head fall in the notch between Ava's collarbone and shoulder. His thumb settled. His breath found a soft track and kept to it. Doll stepped in and checked the number on the little screen and wrote another number on her chart. She looked up once and saw the way Ava and Grady had arranged themselves around the child. She saw the red kerchief, the steady hand on the basin, the word that still lay in the air. She smoothed the edge of the towel and left them to it. Grady put his palm over Ava's where it rested on the blanket. He did not press. He did not pull. Ava did not move her hand away. She kept her eyes on Noah. The lamp traced each finger where the light caught. The generator coughed and steadied again. The rain thinned until it sounded like paper being torn in another room. By the hour when the gray finds its first place in the window, Noah's heat had stepped down. His hair lay in damp commas along his head. His skin was warm, not burning. Doll brought a glass of water for Ava, and a second for Grady, and a small measured bottle with a child's taste that was kinder than the last. "Sleep if you can," she said. "You can keep the room until morning. Ring if he turns." Ava drank and felt the water all the way to the bottom of her. Grady took his and set it on the sill. He rubbed his palms together once and studied the lines there, as if a map had changed in the night. He stood to stretch, and the chair let go of him with a sound like a sigh. Ava shifted Noah, and the boy did not wake. They kept the quiet without effort. A bus went past on the road and made a wet hush. Somewhere a door closed in a careful house, and a latch clicked into a place where it belonged. Ava let her head rest for a moment against the wall. Sleep brushed her and pulled back. She had learned to doze in slices and wake with her hand already where it was needed. When the light rose enough to soften the edges of things, Noah made a small noise and tried his voice again. This time he did not try the word. He tried a hum and let it work in his chest like the memory of a song. Grady answered with the same tone. The two sounds met and made something that settled into the space above the bed. Doll returned with a folded paper and a pencil that had been sharpened until it wore a new name. She set the paper on the tray. "Keep him upright a while," she said. "Tiny sips. Lukewarm. Watch for the flush at the cheeks and the pull at the ribs. If they come back hard, come back. You are close." Ava nodded. "Thank you." Doll gave the nod of a person who has seen a night done right by the people in it. She lifted the blinds an inch. That small light found the glass, and a wet line slid down and made a clear path through the fogged pane. Grady stood and put his cap in his hand. They left the room when the hallway had taken on the thin brightness of a day that has not made up its mind. The waiting chairs sat like a row of square mouths. A coffee maker near the desk made a small, determined sound that promised more than it could deliver, and then delivered it anyway. The foyer smelled of wool and rain and the sharp clean that comes after hard work. Ava adjusted the blanket around Noah. The boy blinked and then went back under. The clinic door opened on the wet steps with a hinge that had been kept honest with oil. Under the awning stood Pastor Eli Reed with his hat darkened and dripping at the brim. He had the look of someone who had been outside long enough to be made part of the weather and had not minded. His eyes took in what they needed and left the rest alone. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," Ava said. Reed's gaze went to Noah and then to the red kerchief at the boy's neck. He held the edge of the door and ran a thumb along the clean pivot where metal met metal. He was quiet a moment, the kind of quiet that fits a man who is used to rooms that ask for listening first. "You stood as a father yesterday," he said, looking at Grady, his voice even and gentle. "In the sight of God and the people who know you. That means something." Grady held his cap in both hands. Rain ran off the brim and tapped his knuckles. He did not drop his eyes. "I know," he said. Reed shifted his weight, and the boards under him spoke a little. "Do you intend to carry what you took in your mouth?" Ava looked at Grady. She did not set words in front of him. She did not move. Noah slept as if the word he had spoken had used some small right part of him and left the rest in peace. Grady's jaw worked once. He looked at the child, then at Ava's hand on the blanket, then at Reed. His answer stayed behind his teeth for a breath, then another. The rain eased to a fine drift and hung in the air like smoke that had decided to become weather. Reed did not press. He touched the brim of his hat and stepped aside so they could pass. "Come by if you need anything," he said. They went down the steps slow. The wood was slick and knew it. Grady kept one arm near Ava's back without touching. The truck waited with its hood dotted and its tires wearing a dark shine. The street held puddles that made perfect circles when the last drops found them. The town felt rinsed and ready to be itself. At the passenger door, Ava paused. The hinge here complained in a familiar way. Grady reached to catch it before the sound became a sharp thing. He held the door and looked at her with the same careful attention he had used in the night. A jay shouted from the pine near the clinic and then thought better of it. She lifted Noah into the warm pocket of the cab and climbed in after him. Grady shut the door with a quiet hand. In the mirror, the clinic awning held a line of water that had not yet found its edge. The road home waited with its own curves and grades. Grady set his palm to the wheel and felt the grit that work leaves there. Ava settled Noah and touched the small, damp curls at his neck. The air in the cab took on the last of the rain and the first of the day. The drive home took the shape of the road and kept it. Pines shed the last of the rain in soft silver as the truck moved under them. A hawk sat on a fence post and watched the wet field, as if it had seen this day many times and trusted the ending. Ava kept Noah high against her. His skin was warm, but not burning. He slept with his mouth open just enough to show the smooth dark of inside. The yard held the night's water in shallow mirrors. The spoon chime lifted a note and let it fall. Grady cut the engine and sat a second with both hands on the wheel, as if polite. He came around and opened the door with his shoulder. The hinge gave its quiet complaint. He took Noah with the same care he had at the clinic. The boy did not wake. Inside the cabin, the air wore the cool of a room that had kept still. Ava laid Noah in the cradle and tucked the blanket light over his stomach so his ribs could rise without arguing with cloth. She stood a moment with her hand on the curve of the wood. Her forearm learned his breath and kept count without needing to. Grady glanced at the door as a man glances at a job that has introduced itself more than once. He set his toolbox down by the jamb. He looked along the frame and saw where the paint had thinned to the idea of paint. He put his shoulder to the wood and tested the sag with his body before he brought out a square. The square told him what his shoulder already had. He smiled without showing it. Ava put water on and set a hand on the kettle as if she could make it hurry. The first heat found the metal. It clicked once like a quiet yes. She wiped the table where Noah had left a faint line of stew last night. She set 2 cups out and did not fill them yet. She did not want to break the room's hush. Grady took the old hinge off and set the screws aside, heads up. He ran his thumb along the mortise and felt where the wood had crushed in on itself with years of use. He brought out a thin cedar shim and made it into the shape the empty place wanted. The plane sang in a low way. Curls of pale wood gathered at his knee. Sunlight caught each curl like fine straw. He pressed the shim in and set the new hinge leaf against it. He found the stud through memory and the way a screw reminds a hand where to aim. The first bite of the bit felt true. He eased the door into swing. It moved in an arc that sounded like a breath let out slow. The hinge spoke once short the way a person clears a throat when they want to get a word right. He worked it again. The sound shortened. He set the strike plate and colored the latch with soap from his pocket so it would learn to slide where he wanted. He closed the door and opened it, closed it and opened it. The latch began to believe him. Ava watched from the counter with her palm against the warm kettle lid. Noah sighed in his sleep and stretched just enough to raise one arm into the air before it made its way back to his chest. The creek behind the house had found its brighter voice. It did not say anything you needed to answer. It just said itself. Grady stood back and pushed with 2 fingers. The door swung. The hinge kept its peace. He nodded once the way a man does when something that needs to be right is now right. He put his tools away in the careful order they had asked for over years. He set the old screws in a little jar with a few others. They made a soft clink. He set the jar on the shelf where any hand could find it. Ava poured tea, chamomile again. The steam folded into the cool of the room and changed it. She put a cup near his hand. He wrapped his fingers around it and took a sip without blowing. He watched the door not as a man proud of his work, but as a man who had just met quiet and did not want to startle it. "Thank you," she said. He looked toward the cradle. "How is he?" "Better," she said. "He sleeps like he means it." They drank with the table between them and all the small things that lived there. A white thread had curled loose from the tablecloth, and she wound it around her finger. He reached and put a tiny square of folded linen on the wood. Blue stitches wrote 3 words in a line that wavered once and kept going. "Come back safe." He studied the edges with his thumb. His face did not move, but the air near him did. Ava watched the way his shoulders took the weight of the gift and set it in the right place inside. "I have not carried anything like this," he said. "Then start," she said. He folded the square once and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. The cloth disappeared, but the knowledge of it did not. He rose and went to the porch. Ava followed with a small tray that held a nail set and a little jar with letters burned on its lid. Grady had brought a length of pine no wider than his hand. He had sanded the face, rounded the corners by feel, and burned letters that were almost even. Noah's home. He turned the board in the light. The grain ran like water across the word. He found the place near the step where the board would touch first eyes and last. He set 2 screws. The driver bit and seated. The sign looked both new and like it had been waiting there. Ava touched the edge with one finger and left a print that would fade when the sun took the last of the oil. Noah woke and made the small sound that meant he was ready to try the day again. Ava lifted him and brought him to the doorway. He saw the board and reached. His palm made a soft pat on the letters. He leaned his head against Ava's chest and made that pleased noise that belonged nowhere else and fit everywhere in this little life. Luke came along the fence with his hands in his jacket pockets. He stopped when he saw the board. He did not step onto the porch until somebody asked him to. Ava did the asking without words. She raised her chin toward him, and he came up 2 steps, not 3. He read the word and set his tongue in his cheek for a second. "Looks right," he said. Grady nodded. He rested a hand against the new rail and did not look at Luke long or short. He let the weight of the moment be what it was. Luke looked at Noah. The boy banged one hand on the sign and laughed as if he had made it. Luke's mouth made a shape that was nearly the first shape of a smile, and then it left. He reached to touch Noah's foot. The toes curled. He stayed another breath and then left with his usual elbows. At the bottom of the step, he paused and half turned. "Door sounds better," he said. "It does," Ava said. When he had gone, Grady closed the door from the porch side. The latch fit with a sound that felt like the end of a good line in a poem. He opened it. It moved without complaint. He set his palm to the jamb, then to the center of the panel, as if taking the cabin's temperature. He nodded again. Afternoon slipped into the house slowly. The light that came in wore pine green at the edges. Ava set Noah on the floor, and the boy claimed a wooden spoon and drummed it against the new step until the spoon told him the truth about its limits. Grady fed the chickens and checked that the coop latch did not bind. He stacked 3 cords of split wood tighter than a banker stacks bills. He wiped his hands and came back to the porch where Ava had left the sewing box. She sat on the top step and picked a stitch free on the torn curtain. He sat on the step below without asking. The spoon chime found a simple tune and stayed with it. The air smelled like sun on old boards, damp earth, getting ready to dry, and the faint sweetness of the chamomile they had not finished. "I keep waiting for it," Ava said, eyes on the curtain. "For what?" "The hinge," she said. "That sound. It taught me what to expect." He watched Noah crawl to the threshold and take the little rise with both knees and then both hands. He watched the boy sit and look proud of a thing no one else had noticed. "It can learn a new sound," he said. She looked at him and then at the door. The thought moved across her face and settled. She set the needle again and tied a knot. Inside, the kettle put its last trace of heat into the room and went quiet. The creek did not change its mind about running. It moved around a stone and made a small foam that looked for a second like lace and then was gone. Grady stood and dusted his hands without needing to. He set the sign's last screw a fraction tighter. He picked up his tools. Ava rose and carried Noah on her hip to where he stood. The boy leaned out and set a hand on Grady's shoulder, as if claiming anything that could be claimed with a hand that small. Grady touched the boy's wrist in answer. The door closed behind them, with the sound of wood meeting wood in the way wood likes. The new hinge kept its counsel. The sign took the last of the light. The letters held it. Evening slid over the ridge in a color close to ash. The sign by the step held a last line of sun and then let it go. Ava fed the chickens and checked the latch by feel. Grady stacked the final split logs 2 to a hand and set the last piece as if it belonged to a pattern you could not see all at once. Noah banged a wooden spoon against the door frame and laughed at the hollow knock. Air changed. The pines went quiet before the first wind found them. A low roll moved across the hills as if someone had pulled a heavy cart over a wooden bridge far away. The spoon chime quivered and did not sing. Ava looked up and met the sky that had lost its edges. Grady walked the fence line and came back with his shoulders wet. He checked the coop again, then the window latch in the corner that liked to forget itself. A drop hit the step and made a dark coin. Another found the board beside it. Then the roof began to speak. The sound ran the length of the metal and settled into a steady drum. Ava lifted Noah from the floor, his hands still closed around the spoon. He studied the room and set his mouth in the way he does before tears learn where to start. Lightning made a white square on the wall that vanished too soon to understand. Thunder came after and fit itself under the floorboards. The boy startled and clutched at the collar of Ava's dress. Heat rose where his hand landed. Grady closed the porch door with a palm and listened for the latch to find its seat. The hinge kept its peace. Rain hit the eaves and leapt. A small leak that had been fixed last spring remembered itself and began again in a thin thread at the far corner. Ava slid a pot under it without looking. The first drop met the metal with a single bright sound, and then another and another until it was a rhythm. Noah began to cry. It was not loud at first. It was certain. He arched and pushed against the place that had always held him. Ava swayed and counted the way a person counts stones across a creek. 1, 2, 3. She tried a song without words and could not find a tone that matched the room. Grady reached for the boy. He did not take him until Ava offered. He eased Noah into the crook of his arm and set the other hand to the small back. He shifted his weight from heel to toe and found a line that would not jar the ribs. The boy's cry held for another breath and then fell to a rough complaint. Grady began a low hum that had lived in him long before this room. The tune had no name. It climbed a step and then settled on a note that the walls liked. It fell and found the ground and stayed until breath required change. The old chair near the hearth took his weight and gave a soft answer. He stood instead. He walked the room and let his steps keep the meter. The roof kept its own measure overhead. The pot caught drops that were not on time with anything and did not need to be. Ava set a kettle on and lit the flame. Blue found its shape and held. Steam crawled up the spout and wrote itself on the cool air. She stood with one hand on the counter and the other near Grady's free shoulder, close enough to feel the slow rise and fall of his breath, not close enough to change it. She listened to the hum and felt her own lungs answer where they could. Lightning bled through the curtains and left the room the same size. Thunder set a hand against the walls, and the walls held. Noah's cry softened until the sound was only a sore place in the throat. He pressed his face into Grady's coat and relearned the sound of a heart that did not live in his own chest. One small fist found the seam of the pocket where the square of linen lay folded against the inside. He gripped it through the fabric and did not let go. "Here," Ava said, and put a cup near Grady's reach on the table. He did not take it yet. He kept his circle from door to hearth to window, then back to the door. The hinge made no sound at his passing. The sign outside took the rain and darkened a shade. "You could have gone home before the storm," Ava said. She kept her eyes on Noah's hair. "You usually do." Grady did not stop. His voice came quiet, the hum thinning so the words could sit on it. "My feet remembered a different road." The room held that without asking him to shape it any further. Ava turned the flame low. The kettle breathed in a softer register. Noah's thumb found his mouth. His lashes stuck in little points on his cheeks. He sighed and gave up the last of the protest. Lightning again. Closer. Thunder walked right through the house and out the back. Noah flinched. Grady rose on his toes and lowered again, the old dance of giving a child another floor to stand on. The hum thickened, then thinned like water that deepens and shallows over stones. Ava found herself singing under her breath. No words, just a sound, a shade under his, the way harmony is found by people who do not talk about music. Rain began to slacken. The pot under the leak dropped its tempo until each note could be counted. Grady stood very still with the boy's head under his chin. He did not look at Ava, and she did not need him to. They watched a different thing together. Noah's hand loosened on the coat. His breath evened. The rough place in his throat quieted to a soft rasp, and then to nothing that needed notice. Grady walked to the cradle and paused. Ava lifted the blanket and smoothed the sheet with one palm. They both looked at the small space that had held so many hours. He set Noah down as if the world were made of thin glass and was safe in the right hands. The boy turned once, seeking found the fold of linen where his neck remembered it, and slept into it. Rain cleared its throat and left the roof. A drip at the eave held on, a while like a slow thought. The chime tried a note and found two others that agreed. The hinge stayed quiet, as if it had learned respect for certain hours. Grady stood by the crib with both hands on the rail. The back of his coat still held a line of wet that had not met the room's warmth yet. Ava took a towel from the hook and came up behind him. She touched the fabric at his shoulder and pressed once to lift the water. He did not step away. She moved to the other shoulder. He let out a breath he had been keeping. He looked toward the door. He looked back at the child. He looked at her. A lot of life lived behind that quiet. "I do not want to pretend," he said. Ava held the towel in both hands and studied the weave as if it could tell her something she did not already know. She set it over the chair back and met his eyes. She did not ask him to say it twice. "Stay," she said, "if that is the truth you carry." He nodded. He took his cap from where he had hung it and set it on the table instead of on his head. He unbuttoned the top of his coat and let the room take the rest of the wet. He moved to the door and pushed it with 2 fingers as if to test the hinge again. It opened without a word. He closed it and the latch fit the plate with a small, clean answer. Ava set another log on the coals and waited for the wood to take. The new fire found a voice that did not ask for attention. She poured tea and slid his cup closer. He took it now. They stood in the warm reach of the small flame and drank in sips. Noah slept without turning. The creek in back ran full and sure. The house listened and kept what it had been given. Later, when the wind found nothing else, it wanted Ava set a folded quilt at the end of the couch. Grady did not argue. He took off his boots and set them side by side. He set his wallet and keys on the table and the little jar of screws on top of them, as if weight might keep the day in place. He lay back and looked at the ceiling with the lines of old beams that someone had cut when nothing had been simple. Ava checked the lock. She did not need to. She did it anyway. The hinge rested. The sign by the step shone dark with rain. The breath of 3 people found a measure. The room learned it and kept time. Morning came up clean behind the ridge. The yard wore a lace of wet light, every blade of grass holding one small bead. The sign by the step had dried in wide streaks and showed the grain like a riverbed after flood. Inside the room held the cool left by the night. Ash under the grate showed a soft red at the heart where the new log had not yet taken. Ava woke first. She checked the cradle before she let herself breathe. Noah slept on his side with one arm thrown up the red kerchief under his neck like a flag that had found its right country. His skin felt warm, not hot. She pressed her lips to his hair and tasted clean and the faint salt of dried sweat. On the couch, Grady opened his eyes and did not move for a second, as if he were listening to see if the house would accept him again in daylight. He sat up and put his feet on the floor. His boots waited side by side where he had left them. He looked at the closed door and then at the hinge that had kept quiet through a storm and a hard sleep. He let his hand rest on his knee and found a sliver there that had somehow traveled from yesterday. He did not pull it yet. Ava made coffee that tasted like a promise fulfilled in small parts. She set a cup on the table near Grady's hand and pushed it across the wood with her fingertips. He drank and let the heat find its way in. "Thank you," he said. "For the door," she said. He nodded and took another sip. His eyes went to the cradle. He stood and crossed the room. He set 2 fingers against the rail and looked down. Noah breathed with small, steady effort, a sound no one else would hear unless they had learned his notes. Grady set his palm flat and left it there long enough to count to 5. A knock sounded on the porch, not loud, twice polite. Grady looked to Ava. She wiped her hands on a towel and went to the door. The hinge opened and stayed quiet. Pastor Eli Reed stood under the shadow of the roof, with his hat in his hands and his hair still damp at the edges. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Ava said. Reed took in the room with the spare attention of a man who has learned to see only what he needs to. He saw the couch with its folded quilt at the end. He saw the sign by the step through the open door. He saw Grady where he stood by the cradle. His mouth changed shape by a margin. "I came to bring a word and to check on the boy," he said. "He is sleeping," Ava said. "Fever broke." Reed nodded. He stepped 1 pace inside and kept his boots on the mat. He looked at Grady and then at the door hinge as if those 2 things spoke to each other in a language he almost knew. "Yesterday you stood as a father," he said. "That is not a small mouthful to take. It has weight that does not go away when the hymn ends." Grady did not move away from the cradle. He turned to face Reed. He held his cap in both hands like a lesson. He did not swallow quick or look down. "I know," he said. Reed waited. It was the kind of waiting that has room for an answer and does not insist on it. He closed his fingers around the brim of his hat, released them, closed them again, patient with his own hands. "What do you mean to do with that weight?" he said. Grady looked at the child. He looked at Ava. Her face did not teach him what to say. It did not spare him either. He knew the place inside where the words had been living. He had kept them there through a night of rain and a song older than names. He had said some of it in a room where God sits close. He had said the rest in the way he had carried a small body through a storm. "I will carry it," he said. Reed's shoulders let go of a line they had been holding. He tipped his hat as men do to seal small agreements and to bless a thing without fancy. He stepped back to the porch and set the hat on his head. His eyes went to the sign and came back to the door. If you need me, call, he said. If you do not, that will be fine also. Ava saw him down the steps. The wood wore the mark of last night's water, but did not slip. The air had taken on that rare clearness after a storm that makes even old boards look new. She stood a moment and watched Reed follow the fence line and turn at the corner by the spruce. When she came back, Noah had found a lighter sleep. His mouth opened and shut once without sound. Grady had moved to the table and set his wallet, his keys, and the tiny jar of screws in a neat line, then stacked the jar on the keys to keep the day from blowing away. He looked up when she touched the chair back. I need to take him to the clinic after lunch, she said. Doll will want to listen. Grady stood. He reached for the satchel that lived on the hook and set it on the table. Ava opened it and put in a clean shirt, a small jar of ointment, and the cap with the soft edge that did not rub the skin behind Noah's ear. Her fingers moved quick, then slowed. She folded the edge of the shirt and refolded it without needing to. Grady set 2 fingers on the strap. He did not take the bag. He did not push it back. He let the weight of his hand speak. You do not have to go alone. Kan manipikon, he said. Ava did not look up right away. She set the ointment a fraction to the left and then to the right, then left it where it wanted to be. She closed the satchel without snapping the clasp. She watched her own hand rest on the leather, as if it belonged to someone she had known before. Stay, she said. Not because of the storm, not because of last night, for here, for him, for you. He let out a breath that did not look like relief so much as release. He reached into his coat and took out the square of linen with the blue words and the careful stitches. He set it on the table between them and smoothed it with his palm. I will carry this, he said. I will carry him where you ask, when you ask, and when you do not. She nodded. She took the square and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, the one his hand always found without looking. Her fingers stayed there a second longer than they needed to, then came away. Boots sounded on gravel outside. Luke's shoulders filled the doorway before he spoke. He did not step in. He looked at the sign, then at the couch with the rumpled quilt, then at Grady's hand on the satchel. His jaw did its familiar work, and then rested. You taking him in, he said. We are, Ava said. Luke's eyes touched Grady and lifted a question that had no shape. Grady did not answer it with words. He reached for the satchel and lifted it. He held it without strain. Luke looked at his sister. She stood easy in her own house. He let his breath out. He tipped his head once, not up and not down. All right, he said. Noah woke with that soft complaint babies make when they are not sure what the world is, but want to participate anyway. Ava lifted him. He fit under her chin in the way her body had learned. Grady held the door for them. The hinge kept its peace. Sun caught the brass of the latch and turned it to a coin for 1 heart's beat. The yard smelled of wet pine and iron. The bucket under the eave had filled and overflowed and now sat mostly empty and clean. The pump handle wore a dark line where water had run and dried. A jay fussed, then forgot its fuss, and went to the top wire, where it could look down on all this and call it what it was. At the truck, Grady set the satchel in the cab, and then turned to Ava without a word. She passed Noah into his arms, and kept one hand on the boy's foot while she climbed. Grady handed Noah back once she was settled. The engine turned and held. The mirror showed Luke at the edge of the porch with his hands in his pockets. He took 1 step down, then another, then stopped, and lifted a hand in a way that held both warning and blessing. Grady nodded and put the truck in gear. They rolled over the ruts and found the smooth part. The wipers made a last dry arc, then rested. The hinge of the passenger door had learned from its cousin at home and did not speak unless spoken to. Ava touched the back of Noah's neck and felt the quiet there. Grady watched the road. His coat felt heavier where the square of linen sat. His hands on the wheel kept a line true in the center of a track that had seen many kinds of weather. The town rose up with its small roofs and tidy piles. The chapel steeple cut the day with an edge that did not threaten. The bakery's window fogged on the inside and cleared in the top corner. The clinic porch held a strip of sun across the top step that would be warm to the touch. The truck moved through air that had decided to be kind. They did not speak for a while. They did not need to. The house behind them kept the new sound it had learned. The road in front offered its familiar curve and grade. The weight of 3 people shared itself and became something the vehicle could carry without strain. Ava looked at Grady's profile. The line from ear to jaw was unremarkable in a way that let her trust it. She turned back to Noah and pressed her cheek to his soft hair. He made a happy sound in his sleep and touched the window glass with open fingers. His breath fogged a small oval there and then cleared. Grady turned into the clinic drive. Gravel lifted, then settled. He cut the engine. The The world held still for the length of a single quiet breath. He looked at Ava, not to ask, just to meet. "Ready," he said. She nodded and opened her door. The hinge, respectful now, kept its place. Nurse Doll listened with the rubber bell set gentle to Noah's back. The boy sat on Ava's lap and patted the metal tray with the flat of his hand. Doll's eyes flicked to the numbers on the small screen, then to Noah's cheeks, then to the rise at his ribs. She smiled with the corner of her mouth and wrote 2 tidy lines. "He is through it," she said. "Keep him upright after meals, warm water, fresh air if the wind is kind." Ava felt something unclench behind her breastbone. Grady let his breath out without sound. Doll touched Noah's hair once with the back of her fingers, as if to avoid giving static. She nodded to both of them and left them to button the small shirt and gather the satchel. Outside the clinic, the day had decided to be all blue and clean. The pine on the hill behind the building wore a halo of steam that rose and thinned. Pastor Reed was crossing the street with a bundle of hymnals under one arm. He paused when he saw them. His gaze took a gentle measure of the boy in Ava's arms. "Glad to see him bright," he said. "He is better," Ava said. Reed balanced the weight in his arms. "When you are ready," he said to Grady, "the chapel can make room for what is already happening." He did not push. He tipped his hat and kept walking the hymnals snug under his arm like a stubborn flock. They drove home through air that tasted like rain, that had made a promise and kept it. Noah's head grew heavy against Ava's collarbone. Grady watched the road and the way light laid itself across the ruts like clean cloth. Days folded over one another. Noah's fever did not return. He learned to clap on purpose. He found the low drawer that held wooden spoons and took them out one at a time to hear the many ways a spoon can be a drum. Ava worked. The early shift came home with flour on her forearms and leaned on the porch rail, while Noah pressed his face to the screen to watch her come up the walk. Grady cut a length of cedar and milled it true. He replaced the back step that had begun to sigh. He oiled the hinge once with a drop from his pocket tin, and the hinge answered with a quiet that sounded like a promise that had been kept a second time. Luke came by on Tuesdays to bring eggs and a question that was not a question. He stayed for coffee and left with a nod that had lost some of its stiffness. Miss Hart waved from across the street without stopping him to receive advice. The town held its opinions like it holds weather. After a while, the sharp edges rounded and everything moved easier. 3 weeks is not long. 3 weeks is enough for wild grass to green and for a child to try a new word with a full mouth. On a morning that began with the thin gold only seen over snowmelt water, Ava lifted Noah into his shirt with the buttons that often forgot their buttonholes. She brushed his hair with 3 strokes and a 4th, just because it made him laugh. Grady put on a jacket that had once been for Sundays and now was for this. They went to the chapel by the narrow road that keeps its shade through afternoon. The bell did not ring. It did not need to. Inside light sat in clean shapes on the pewbacks and made the wood grain look like rivers seen from far above. Nurse Doll stood near the front with her hands folded, her watch face turned in as always. Luke came and took a place by the aisle and would not be coaxed forward. He liked a view that included a door. Pastor Reed set his book on the rail and looked up. There was no crowd. There did not need to be. He nodded to Ava. He nodded to Grady. He leaned down to grin at Noah, who was doing his best to fit both fists into his mouth, and nearly had the trick of it. "We do not have much to say," Reed said. "Most of it has been said already where it counted." He looked at Grady. "Grady Wolfe, do you take this child as your own before God and the people who matter to him?" Grady adjusted Noah on his hip. The boy slid to the crook of his arm and found the red kerchief at the neck and held on. Grady looked at the child first, then at Ava. He did not search for words. He had found them already. "I already did," he said. Reed's eyes eased. He turned to Ava without turning all the way, as if to give the words a place to rest. Ava reached into her pocket and brought out a small ring. Silver caught the light and sent it back as a small, quiet gleam. The band was simple and clean. The inside had been engraved with a cedar sprig that would be felt by finger rather than read by eye. "It was my mother's spoon," she said. "I had it melted and given another shape." Grady held out his hand. She slid the ring into place. The metal felt cool then warm against his skin. He did not take his eyes off Ava while she did it. Behind them, Luke cleared his throat and pretended he had dust in it. Doll watched with her face still and her eyes lit. There were no long vows. Reed said a simple line about standing where you say you will stand and keeping to it even on days that are only ordinary. They did not bow their heads for longer than it takes to blink and see the whole picture again. Reed closed his book and did not open it again. He pressed Ava's hand in both of his and then Grady's and stepped back so they could leave the space as they found it. They walked out into a morning that had decided to be bright from roofline to ridge. Noah reached for the bell rope and touched only air. He laughed anyway. Grady put him on his hip, and the boy grabbed the brim of Grady's cap and bent it, and looked proud of his work. The four of them stood a moment on the steps. Reed went inside with his book. Dahl went to the clinic. Luke wiped his eye and made it look like he was fixing his hat. Ava felt the ring on Grady's hand as if it were on her own. The truck creaked into motion. The road out of town gave way to clear fields, and then to the stand of trees that kept their own counsel. At the bend by the creek, the water widened for 10 yards and made a calm place with a sandy edge. Grady slowed and pulled off where the grasses bent and rose again at his passing. They went down to the water with Noah riding high. The creek held yesterday's rain in a brighter voice. Grady put the small boat into Ava's hands. She had set it on the mantel for weeks and had kept from pushing it across the floor too often. Now, she set it on the edge where the water nibbles the shore. Noah reached and touched the smooth curve. The boat drank the light where the oil had fixed the grain. It moved. It caught a slow current and went sideways and then forward, a little traveler taking the path that was already there. Noah clapped. He said something that could have been the start of 2 words at once. He looked at Grady and found the one he wanted. Daddy said clean and bright, as if the syllable were a small door that finally fit its frame. Ava heard it pass through the air and land where it was meant to. Grady closed his eyes for half a second. He set his palm over the back of Noah's head with a care that was almost reverent. When he opened his eyes, he watched the boat until it rounded a small rock and kept going. They went home slow. The sign by the step took the noon light and looked new again. The door opened with a quiet that did not need to prove itself. Noah slapped both hands on the letters of his name and laughed at the fine sound they made under his palms. Ava set the kettle on. Grady set his cap on the peg he had fixed that first week, and it stayed there true. At the table, Ava took Grady's hand and turned it palm up. The ring caught the light and kept it. The blue stitches under that cloth pocket pressed a small shape against the inside of his coat. The hinge rested. The creek made its old song at the edge of all this. Noah tugged at Grady's sleeve and climbed into his lap without asking. Grady looked down at him and then across at Ava. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Afternoon laid itself flat and kind. The room smelled like tea and sun on wood and clean child. A breeze found its way through the screen and moved the curtain an inch. Somewhere outside, a jay scolded and then gave up. The house took the 3 breaths inside it and learned their measure. When the door closed, the latch answered with a soft click, the sound of something made right and kept right. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.